What if the world was really and truly controlled by big tech? I mean, we hear a lot about big tech, right? And it's controlling a lot of things around us right now. But what if everything was run by artificial intelligence, AI as it's known? What if that was running your life, determining what you were going to eat, where you were going to live, how long your commute was, who you could meet, who you could interact with? I mean, it's not entirely inconceivable, right? If technology is not kept in check. This is the backdrop behind a fascinating brand new book called Terms of Service. It's a science fiction novel set 250 years into the future, and in this brave new world, the individual ceases to exist. I'm joined right now by the author of Terms of Service, Mr. Craig Stanfill, who knows a few things about artificial intelligence and the power of it. As a computer scientist and a software engineer, he's actually been somewhat instrumental in its development and creation. Craig, welcome to the program. It's good to have you here, and congrats on the book.
Thank you, Trish. It's a delight to be here.
So what motivated you? I should start with that. I mean, you have a background in computer engineering. What motivated you to write this book?
I think the place where it started was where I saw big tech becoming ever more censorious and shutting down free speech and ever more powerful. And I kept talking to my friends, a lot of whom are liberals, and said, they're censoring us. That's not right. And their answer was, well, they're private companies. They can do whatever they want to. They write their terms of service, hence the name of the book, and you just have to live with them. And I said, haven't you ever read any of those science fiction novels where the corporations have taken over? There's not any place you want to live. And they would look at me like with these blank stares. What are you talking about? So I decided I was going to write the novel that they needed to read to understand what might happen and quite possibly will happen if we let big tech keep on going the way it is and start using artificial intelligence in particular to control our lives and to monitor our actions.
You know, the AI stuff is pretty scary because we see it already, right? You scroll through your news feed on your phone and you get advertisements, and it's almost like they know, right, exactly what you want. It's kind of crazy. It's a little bit spooky. Your novel takes it so much further, right, in terms of spookiness, because they're controlling everything in your environment. But a lot of this, Craig, it's actually happening right now, isn't it?
Absolutely. The social media companies and I guess government also are starting to use AI ever more often and more frequently. As an example, Facebook has something like 1.5 billion users that are on every day and over 2 billion users that are on a monthly basis. And they've only got 15,000 content moderators. 15,000 people cannot ride herd on 2 billion, no matter how clever they are. And so what they've done is they're starting to use AI as a force multiplier so that they can gain more control on their network. I did a little experiment. As we all know, they've got these pop-ups on Facebook. If you say anything about COVID, it pops up. And so I was wondering, where does that come from? I'm a computer scientist. I did an experiment. I put together a meme that said, this has absolutely nothing to do with COVID-19. It's just bait for the bots to see if they're paying attention. And I put it up on my author's page on Facebook, and lo and behold, people started getting this pop-up that said, this talks about COVID-19. Now, what that means is that, yeah, they've got AIs that are looking at everything you put and looking for COVID-19 and what you've put in there. And they could be looking for other things too. They can look for anything.
And it's subjective based on what they think is appropriate. In this case, it may actually be the government that has a hand in it too. Jen Psaki, who's the White House press person, recently came out and said that the White House was working with Facebook to make sure that it was able to, get rid of any sort of false information surrounding COVID. So they've made that clear already. At some point, right, somebody's programming the AI. Somebody's got to actually, decide what artificial intelligence should and shouldn't like.
Right. And here's the way it works. You get a bunch of data, say a bunch of things that people have typed into a computer, and you set a bunch of people down at a computer and they say, is this dangerous misinformation or not? I'll just pick that as an example. Is this dangerous disinformation about COVID? And they'll say yes, they'll say no, and they'll train up a neural network or something like that and put it out onto Facebook's network, and then the neural network will replicate the decisions that the trainers were making. And so you've got, ever how many trainers they have get multiplied by 1,000 or 1,000,000 or whatever it needs to be in order to look at everything that comes across Facebook's desk, which is a huge amount of things, far more than people could look at. So that's how it works. And of course, it's going to end up learning from people, and it's going to make the same decisions as the people would have made. And if they're liberals, they're going to start making liberal decisions.
Could work the other way too, though, Craig. I mean, I would think anybody should be concerned about this, regardless of what side of the political aisle you're on, because it could be a boomerang. I mean, if the Republicans suddenly get in charge, they could use this against Democrats and vice versa. I mean, it's not good for anyone.
Well, what goes around always comes around, as they say. And everything that is done by one faction will be done by the other someday. And we need to not go there.
One of the things that is a central theme in the book, I mean, just to back up for a little bit and tell people, you've got this wonderful heroine that's the character Kim, and she kind of starts out sort of thinking, not thinking, I should say, right? Like life is just kind of dictated for her, and she has this awakening, to use a term that's important in the book, where she kind of recognizes what's going on. But do you think that too many people in life sort of just they're not thinking enough about this, so whatever artificial intelligence wants to send their way, whatever a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed or anything online for that matter, Google wants to send their way, they just kind of absorb, and it has an effect on their lives without them really even knowing it.
That sort of gets into one of the themes in the book, which is virtual reality. In the book, there's this huge virtual reality system that people drop into. It's sort of like the holodeck on Star Trek. And, when they're there, it's like, completely realistic. And of course, that reality is whatever the computer wants that reality to be. If it wants to turn you into a bird and have you fly around the room, you're a bird and you fly around the room. It's really cool. Lots of fun. But as Kim progresses in her understanding of the world, she realizes that the real world is also a virtual reality of sort. And we're all living in a sort of a virtual reality where all of the information we have comes from somewhere else. It comes from Facebook. It might come from the broadcast media. But we actually don't have access to reality. And what we think of real as being real isn't necessarily real at all. It's what somebody wants us to think is real.
So where does that leave us as a society? I mean, you fast forward a few years, you get all this AI coming your way, influencing your thought, influencing your sort of outlook on life, influencing what you think is real and not real. If that's not kept in check, and I want to get to how the heck we keep it in check, what happens?
We leave ourselves open to manipulation. When people, if they can create a reality, you'll respond to that reality. And if they create a reality that's detached from what's actually happening, then you can start making decisions that are untethered from reality. And they may not work out.
Right. So this gets me back to, what do we do as a society right now? Right? Like, how do we keep this in check? How do we make sure that that big tech is not taking over the world? I mean, that we as individuals have rights and freedoms, and how do we make that known in this environment where, a computer can tell you what to think or what to do?
Well, we've been here before, way back when. Once upon a time, we had kings, and the king could say, you can't say that. And the king could say, I don't like what you said. I'm going to cut off your head. Or maybe just I'm going to exile you and send you off to France. Of course, France also has a king, and he might not let you speak your mind either. But there was no place to run. And we had a revolution to get rid of kings so that they couldn't tell us what to do, and they couldn't tell us how to think, and they couldn't tell us what to say and not to say. And as far as I'm concerned, Zuckerberg and Dorsey and all the others, they're a bunch of kings. They've got their country, call it Facebook, call it Twitter, call it Google. It's a country, and they're absolute rulers of those countries. And we, the people who live in this country, have no power. And I say down with the king. What could be more American than that?
Okay, well, let's take that forward. So down with the king, does that mean the end of Facebook? Or does that mean you have a lot of different Facebooks, so there's more competition in the marketplace, so more points of view are heard?
There's a thing in computer science and communication called the network effect, which is that the usefulness of a communication medium depends exponentially on the number of people who are in it. Mm-hmm. And so having 1,000 people is one thing. Having 1 million people is more than 1,000 times better. It's 1 million times better. And so just because of this thing called the network effect, there is a natural scale to social media networks where they've got to be big in order to be useful. But then that gives whoever controls that social media network too much power should they choose to exercise it.
Sure. No, I hear you. I wrestle with this myself because I question whether they've reached monopoly status. They've certainly treaded all over our First Amendment because they say, well, we're a private company and we don't want that viewpoint out there. But when you're so big, Craig, that you are sort of effectively the conduit for information. I mean, that's a whole different ballgame. And if the answer is not necessarily having a whole bunch of competitors because at some point someone's really going to dominate that, I don't know how you keep them in check.
Well, here I'm going to put on my hat as a computer architect.
Okay.
What you need to do is you need to put power in the hands of the people. Now, I don't want to see racist content in my feed. I don't want to see. There's a whole lot of things I don't want to see in my feed. But I should be the one that decides what I see and what I don't see. And just as a technological solution, I think that you need to decouple Facebook's status as sort of a common carrier from the filtering of information and give people the right to choose whatever fact checker they want, or give people the right to choose whatever content moderation system they want, and decouple them so that Zuckerberg still has a place in the world in terms of, I can talk to anybody in the world if they're willing to listen to me, but I have control over what I see rather than Mark.
That's a really interesting idea. I mean, so that you're introducing more sort of checks and balances in a way into the equation. I mean, checks and balances, it's part of what we were founded on. And you think about the principles of what started this country and the freedoms, right? And then you advance it to computer technology today. I mean, our founding fathers would have had no idea, right, that we could be where we are. And yet here we're looking at our freedoms kind of getting trampled all over. And we've got to find like some kind of solution, right? Because it's just not going to, I don't know how we progress really as a society in the right way. We run the risk of turning into exactly what you're talking about in terms of service.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is happening. We're not there yet, but if you go to China, it's pretty far advanced where the government controls the companies and the companies control what you're allowed to say. Mm-hmm. And they've censored the internet and they have almost complete control over information there. And it's happening here. Now, Facebook and Twitter, they're not the Chinese Communist Party. They're not sort of as power mad and power hungry as the CCP. But try to imagine if this sort of power gets into the hands of the wrong people. Because as much as we may resent in their heavy-handed ways, it could be a lot worse. And someday it probably will.
Well, it's an interesting comparison. I mean, you think about the social credit score, right, that they're already introducing in China. I mean, in some ways, we almost kind of, in a weird way, have it here with all the likes and how many followers do you have and how many friends do you have on social media.
I read something scary the other day. Well, first of all, the social cohesion system in the book is an important aspect of the book. Everything you do either increases or decreases your social cohesion rating. And if you play ball and do what you're supposed to, then you get a nicer apartment because you've got more social cohesion. You get your commute in the morning is faster because you've got more social cohesion. If you do things that they don't want you to do, it falls like a rock. And then it may take you 2 hours to get into work, and you may have cold showers for the rest of the week. Boris Johnson in the UK apparently wants to introduce something like this, where they have some sort of a rating on how healthy you're eating and give you points for not eating fast food. So this is an idea that's getting out there.
Sure. I mean, I think, look, there's this balance that you need to strike in society where you want people making the right decisions, yet simultaneously they need to be free to make those decisions, right? And they need to be able to absorb as much information as they can possibly absorb and read everything they want to read so that they can come to these decisions on their own. I mean, one of the things it's also central in your book is this loss of the individual. They talk about we all the time. There's a collective we, and there's no appreciation for what an individual might need or want.
Yeah, that's true. In the book, I said in public is considered to be a swear word. You might get away with it with friends, but you can't say I in public. And that's because they don't want you to be you to be an individual. They want you to be one of the many, one of the crowd, not distinguish yourself, not give yourself a special place in the world. And in this world that I've created, and to ever greater extent in the world that we live in, saying I is an act of courage. I am an individual. I am unique. There's never been anyone like me before. There will never be anyone like me again. I am important. I have a right to decide for myself. And that is the essence of freedom. And freedom is the foundation of our country. And freedom is the most important thing that you can possibly have. And it's the worst thing that you can possibly lose.
Yeah. I mean, freedom matters. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from this book. It should be one of the big takeaways in society right now, that increasingly we are losing these freedoms, and if we don't do something about it, if we're not careful, then it's very easy to lose. I mean, I've talked to people who grew up in communist or socialist regimes, and they'll tell you, freedom can be quite fleeting, and it's something that you need to protect and guard and value, right?
Absolutely.
Well, listen, I love what you did here. I think it's a fun approach to a very, very dense and serious and scary topic, which is this loss of freedom. And so I'd love for people to read it. I think that it was an important thing for you to do. I'm just curious. I know that you're a computer engineer and software engineer by background, and now you're a writer. I mean, how did that come about? And how long did it take you? I'd love to ask this question. How long did it take you to write this?
From the time I started, it took me about 3 years. I wrote an awful lot of really bad prose, and then I wrote a lot more bad prose. But I got some editors to help me out, and eventually got to be where I could produce a decent novel from the level of prose, and I think a very good one in terms of the content. And I've always been a creative person. Through most of my career, that creativity has been technical in nature. I've created a lot of really good technology that's I've had a good run. Started a software company and produced some software that's very important in the economy, although it's not well known. But I've got to create. I'm not happy unless I'm creating something, and I found something new to create with my worlds and my writing.
Well, it's an important thing that you're doing, because I think you need to warn people of this in different ways, right? I mean, it's one thing for us to talk about it here, or for there to be a political article or an op-ed. It's another thing for somebody to sit down and read an entertaining work of fiction that really outlines it, because it comes home in different ways for different people. But these are topics we need to talk about, and things that need to be discussed. And I commend you for doing that. And I'd love to see people get this book. This is Regan Stanfill's book, Terms of Service, taking place 250 years in the future. And there's some scary stuff that artificial intelligence can really engage in. This is a warning really to all of us. You can find it online. Go to craigwstanfill.com. That's his website, your website, sir, and people can get it there. And I know on Amazon and some other spots. And you've got an audiobook coming out as well, I hear?
Yes, the recording is done. We're proofing it, and it should be out in the middle of August.
Excellent, excellent. And if I may, can I tease a sequel?
Please do.
All right. You've got a sequel coming. We're going to find out more about your heroine there, Kim, and the price of freedom.
Absolutely, and she pays a price, but she's willing to pay it.
Craig, thank you so much for your time. Congrats on the book. Good to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.